All right, so we're going to start with traditional Western ethics.
Briefly, we are condensing a lot of history really quick.
Yeah, so these are going to be broad generalizations here. Western ethical situations as we know it now comes, I think, originally from the early Christian church, the Judeo-Christian background. It's where our current idea of human rights comes from. Sorry, my train of thought is very fuzzy. I am very tired. It's been a long weekend.
And we're talking philosophy.
I promise I know this stuff. Yeah, I was like, Saturday afternoon, that's a great time for philosophy.
I was really surprised too, but that's okay. It's kind of cool. End on a really thoughtful note.
But so that's where we start there, because you got the first idea, it's the first culture that really, as far as I know of, had an idea that the human person had value. The idea that all people were created in the image of a single God, that gave them all equality, regardless of gender, regardless of status in society. So you get stories from the early church of plagues in Rome. All the wealthy elite were leaving. It was the early Christians that stayed and started your first hospitals. They stayed and doctored the sick in the plagues. A lot of them died for it.
The early church did a lot of bad things too.
They did a lot of bad things, but we're going back to like the 100s, 200s, really, really early church before it became a political entity. Because politics screws up a whole lot of things.
Yeah.
That's my personal opinion. Anyways, but we still see some of that today. Like it's how we got our modern hospitals. The idea that you actually wanted to help people like that. The idea that ethics is the individual over, or the community over the individual. Like there's a good reason to look out for your neighbor, to look out for the people around you, not just do what works best for you. Skipping a whole lot of other stuff, we're going to move into the age of reason and enlightenment.
So we're going to go 1800 years. Boom.
Yeah. This is where you get the age of enlightenment. You get a lot of science, electricity, the locomotive. It kind of begins to move into this modern era where the idea that science and technology can solve all of our answers. People, if educated, if you teach them things, if they know things, they will, at their core, make the right choices. I feel like if you in the last 100 years, some of our worst atrocities were created by modern governments in the name of science, and were all justified by science.
That was definitely one of the problems with it. So you have scholars like Immanuel Kant up here, Kant, ethics guy, Kant, but still, who applied modernistic thinking to ethics. And so modernism kind of had these three basic tenets.
Yeah, truth is objective. Basically, you could scientifically say, this is true, this is not, through experimentation.
And science.
Yeah, it was very much on rationality. New is better than old. So you get the idea that we are evolving. This is a new, whatever we come up with now is going to be better than it was 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago.
Progressivism.
Yeah, very progressive.
And then this last one is a big one.
Oh yeah, technology and progress cure everything.
Yep. All of societal problems can be cured through technology. Poor, we can fix it with technology, right? Or is it even a problem?
Or education. I mean, if you just educate everybody, they'll be able to.
Yeah, this is where the idea that people who do evil things are just uneducated, and that if they were just told and taught to do right things, they would be kind people.
Yeah. It has a very optimistic view of humanity.
It does, actually. But it doesn't work in practice, right? We had some of the biggest atrocities in the name of science, done in the name of science the past couple of 100 years. A lot of modernistic thinking is what justified the Holocaust, because social Darwinism was an idea, an ethical idea that emerged out of this. Like, if we want to make the human race better, we got to get rid of all the undesirables.
I mean, but that was their take on science, and they used that modern thinking and science and all the reasoning and logic that was coming out of that time to justify that. Does that make it right? No.
So
I would, yeah.
Yeah. So it caused, what this did is in the 1940s, after the Holocaust and all this, 1950s, a lot of people just had kind of a crisis of conscience. They're like, dang, science has failed us. Modernism has failed us. Where can we go next? Where should our ethics come from next? And enter the postmodernists.
Yeah, I mean, this was directly a result of situations like the Holocaust. I mean, that's a very extreme example, but it's well known.
So getting back to our example of trash talking, a game designer with a modernistic thinking would think that, okay, I can fix trash talking by putting a filter on my computer, on my system, my game, because I can use technology to fix it. That's a direct application, right?
And then people go and find another emote that's not technically toxic, and then they will make it toxic.
Never underestimate people's creativity with language. If you tell us we can't say the F word, we'll find other ways to say it. Right? So postmodernism. You want me to talk about this one?
Well, I lost my train of thought.
Okay. Well, that's very postmodernistic.
I know.
Postmodernism emerged as a reaction to modernism, so it's a direct flip of many of the modernistic ideas. And it too is being applied to ethics, and it too has three basic principles. Okay? Again, we're condensing a lot of information to really summarize it. Here's our first one.
Okay. So whereas in modernism, truth is objective, you can rationally work it out. Under postmodernism, truth is subjective. It recognizes the fact that it's really hard to set down ethical rules, like things that are black and white, it has to be this way, because you can always find exceptions.
Murder is wrong, but what about in war?
But what about in, like, there's all kinds of situations you can find, and murder, of course, is an extreme example. Most people agree that killing other people is wrong. But is there ever a situation where that might be justified?
It's the baby Hitler syndrome, right? If you could go back in time and kill baby Hitler, would you do it? Deadpool couldn't. Some of you saw the extras, which they cut. I don't know why. It's a great ethical question. But unfortunately, this truth is subjective basically means postmodernism is kind of what we call relativism in a new dress. Relativism is the idea that ethics are whatever you want it to be, right? If a society says that, I don't know, cannibalism's okay, that makes it okay. Yeah.
I mean, as Westerners, we disagree with that, but there are cultures that do support that. Do we have any right to tell them otherwise?
Here's our second principle.
People are more complex. So the modernism, one of their, I do agree is a mistake, is that they simplified people. Postmodernism actually gave more value back to the idea of humanity and people as not just kind of,
animals.
not as cooked, yeah.
Animals, yeah. Modernism kind of viewed you as animals, a biological being, and if I gave you the same stimulus, each one of you would react the exact same way, with minor variations here and there.
He said it better than I was. It's been a long weekend. Words are not working for me.
That's okay. You're doing great. Okay, this guy over here, this is Levinus. He was one of the big postmodern ethical speakers of the time. And there's one more, and this one's kind of interesting. So postmodernism also pulls a lot from critical theory. They tend to see power as a huge component in ethics. So the powerful determine what is ethical, and the weak do not. And so this one's a highly contentious debate. Now, of course, this is challenging because postmodernism doesn't like to fit into a box. And so if you say this is postmodernistic, another postmodernist would go, no, that's not it at all. Right?
And you can't argue with them.
Because postmodernism, one of the biggest challenges of postmodernism is that, unlike modernism, which had a very set of rules that many of them agreed with, postmodernists are kind of all over the place, trying to gather different ideas and blend them together. And this has caused a bit of a problem for ethical scholars today, right now. So the postmodernists were really big starting in the 50s on up into the 80s and 90s, okay? That's when they did their stuff. But our ethical scholars today, like Habermas here, he's like, there's a problem with postmodernism because it doesn't really have a foundation. If I want to argue something's right or wrong, what am I basing that on? And the postmodernist will just go, well, I don't know, whatever you want it to be. And Habermas goes, that's not good enough. And so he's he used to be a postmodernistic ethical scholar. He's still alive. I think he's like 96 or something like that. And he's still writing today, basically saying, are we in an era of post-postmodernism where we're trying to Frankenstein some of the things we liked about modernism with some of the things that we didn't like about it, and with things that we like about postmodernism. So we can still see, so here today, here are some of the trends. We still see today that people, when it comes to ethics, they still put a lot of hope and progress in technology. We kind of get the feeling that technology can fix it, right? And we kind of put a lot of hope in that. And we kind of have borrowed from postmodernism and taken a little bit of this relativistic approach to ethics, the you do you method. And you do you is kind of been a mantra for a lot of people today, but it doesn't work in big communities. There's problems there. But there's also this focus on the individual, right? So whatever works for the individual may not work for the next person. So there's this heavy sense of individualism. Is there anything you want to add to that?
I mean, I think with any philosophy, you're going to find that this is a mixed bag, just like postmodernism was, modernism was. Because yes, there are good things that come from progress in technology. We get some really great things from technology that we didn't have hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago.
Yeah, polio sucks.
Yeah.
But COVID sucks too.
Not as much as polio.
Come on, no.
Anyways. But, I mean, so vaccines are good. A lot of the medical technology we have now is really good. And I don't think anyone would disagree that technology is good, but we've also used technology to do some really bad things. Part of the reason for this panel is people are using technology to functionally hurt each other in these games, which are supposed to be fun. Right. Relativism and individualism. Individualism can be good. In any situation, you get outliers. Speaking personally, I have some health problems, and you know what? The standard cookie-cutter treatment, they hand me those medications, I can't tolerate them. I have severe side effects, and now half the doctors now look at me like, oh, I don't know what to do with you now. But the individual matters. Like, people do react differently. You can't just feed them the same medication and expect them to react the same way. So recognizing that there's a difference is important.
So let's apply some of this to, oops, all right. Oh yeah, this is a big one. And this is something Habermas is concerned about. Do we today lack a cultural ethical foundation? Since we're not all like, say, Judeo-Christians, or we're all content, I don't even know what you would call it, Kantian. Kantian? That'd be cool. We don't have a foundation as much as we did before, and that makes it harder for us to want to talk about ethics, because then, well, that just depends becomes our answer for everything, right? And that's not a conversation, that's a conversation stopper. So, ethics get relegated to opinion, where they really shouldn't be, because we should have discussions about right and wrong, especially in community play. All right, so let's take our first ethical situation.
Actually, kind of going back to that to conclude that section, there was a scholar I was listening to on a podcast, and I don't remember which one now, who argued that without ethics, you cannot have community. Like, whether it's community play or community as a whole within a country or a state or whatever, like, if you do not have some form of ethical foundation that everyone can agree on, it will start to disintegrate, which I thought was a really interesting thought to kind of chew on for a while.
All right, let's take our first ethical situation, the rules. Games are about rules. I agree with Salin and Zimmerman and their definition of what makes a game, in the sense that what differentiates a game from like play are the rules. A kitten plays with a ball of yarn, but it's when we start throwing it in baskets and counting points, we've got a game, right? So games are rules, and so rules are the foundation of games, right? Holding to that, and they're basically social rules, really, when you think about it. They're social rules that we all kind of agree to abide by. Every game basically has mechanical rules, formal rules, and even informal rules, right? What do you do with the free parking in Monopoly? Kind of curious. What do you guys do? You what? Put money on it?
Yeah. You put 50 under it, and if you have to like pay from a space or from a card, then you put that money under it too. And if you land on it, then you get that money.
Yeah, that's a variation of what my family played with, except they put more money to start with. I think they put a 500 under it.
What if you lose money from chance? Do you put that in free parking?
Yeah, cards.
Yeah, like if you draw like a chance that says you lose $50, you put a 50 on it.
Is that in the rules that Milton Bradley sends to us?
No.
It's not.
I think in some of the newer versions, you can find it in the optional ways to play at the end.
Yeah. But it wasn't in the original rules, but a lot of people adopted it and used it. And so it was one of those kind of informal rules that kind of became formal.
House rules.
House rules. Those are fun. Breaking the rules leads to accusations of cheating. It impacts our sense of fairness, which is a moral issue. I'm going to give you a story here. In March of this year, BBC reported that a joint effort between the gaming company Tencent, who owns Riot Games, and the Chinese police, they arrested a gang who sold cheating software for games like Overwatch and Call of Duty. You paid a subscription to these guys. Their revenue was $76 million a year. And a subscription only cost you $100. BBC reported that a survey of gamers also suggested that over 1/3 of gamers admit to using cheats to improve their chances online. Why?
Yeah, that's not fun.
That's no fun. I don't know. Having an aimbot can be quite fun when you're trashing everybody.
Hey, there's times where I have been tempted. I play Final Fantasy XIV. If you're familiar with the housing system, if you're not, go YouTube it. It's awful.
Oh, it's terrible.
It has been moments where I'm tempted, and I just actually gave up getting a house instead. But I can see why people would want cheating or botting software sometimes.
And then, of course, you get people who say, it's just a game, right? In his book, Julian Dibble wrote a book called A Rape in Cyberspace. I know, doesn't that sound like a fun title for a game book? And his book was about an ethnography where he was studying this MUD, a multi-user dungeon, okay? Which was like an early text-based Second Life, is the best way I can describe it, okay? In this game, players created avatars and they interacted with one another, and there wasn't any kind of like formal rules to it, so they kind of just role-played a lot. Well, enter a guy named Mr. Bungle. Mr. Bungle was a clown. Mr. Bungle used cheating software that allowed him to take control of other players' avatars and make them do whatever he wanted. So he made them do sexual acts on each other and himself. And they went to the community was naturally upset, and they went to the game designers, the game developers. They said, "Fix this. This is a problem." And the game developer said, "You deal with it.
It's just a game.
It's just a game."
He's not actually hurting you physically, personally.
Yeah. So they held a community trial for Mr. Bungle. All the players got together, and Mr. Bungle showed up. And that was his defense. It's just a game. What does it matter what I do here? It's just a game. Right?
Yeah.
So how do we respond to that? Oh, you got an answer?
Tell them off.
Tell him off. I think Mr. Bungle might like that.
No, it's not just a game, it's my livelihood. I feel like I've been enjoying myself, and you've been ruining the game for me.
That's a
I was
good.
using it as
No, you're right.
The simple one is he's playing a different game than they are.
He
Yeah.
is.
They're playing one game.
But I mean, I think it's a fair question. People use their avatars in games as sometimes it's like representations of themselves. It may not be you physically or personally, like your actual person, but there's a connection there, I think, between a lot of gamers and the avatars they design. So I think this is a question our community should ask.
Is it just a game? And for a lot of people, it's not. I see some hands in the back. I want to make sure I get you guys too. So go ahead.
It's just a game. Why do we keep score?
Why do we keep score? Why do we pay our athletes more than we pay our doctors?
Or our teachers.
Or our teachers? Or our police officers? It's just a game.
I actually had a question.
Yeah.
Where do you slot in, rules that are written but not really enforced? Like in some states, there's weird rules of you can't carry a gun with a law in Final Fantasy, for example, there's a great parse debate when Yoshi P says things like, individualists, advocacies, and all this stuff, what do you really spot that into? Is it breaking the rules, something unethical, or is it just something that people do internally enforce?
So that brings up a good question. Just because something's in the rule doesn't make it ethical, right? Or not, right? Because then you can get into legalism.
Or is a rule any good if nobody enforces it?
Or is it a rule because nobody enforces it, right? Or which point we might consider getting rid of the rule, right?
Yeah, like if mods are supposed to be watching a game and controlling something, but if you report them and they never do anything about it, is the rule actually being enforced?
Yeah.
If a rule's not followed and nobody's there to enforce it, is it still a rule?
There's our tree, right? Again, ethics is about how you treat others, right? It's your interaction with others, right? Can you really steal from yourself? You still got it. I like to break my students' brains when I say, is it possible to lie to yourself? That's immediately what they say, but think about it for a moment. Is it really a lie if you know it's untrue, deep down? And if you have already believed that it's true and you've convinced yourself, then are you lying?
It's a deliberate falsehood. Not lie if you believe it.
Yeah, if you believe it's the truth, then you are acting on the belief and that it is the truth. But if you deep down you kind of go, okay, I know that's really not true, then you're kind of lying to yourself, but then you still know it's not true.
So you're just telling yourself a falsehood.
You can say that. You can say the same thing when someone else lies to you. You say deep down that you believe it's not true or whatever.
Right.
It's other way. It's the same internal as external.
And that's how we differentiate lies from falsehoods, right? A lie is when you're purposely trying to deceive, whereas a falsehood, I just didn't know that was true.
Yeah, there's a difference between being mistaken, like you say something and you think it's true, but then later learn some other facts and now you change your view on that and you're like, okay, I was wrong. I now think this, and you can contradict it, but were you lying originally?
There's nothing wrong with ignorance.
Because there's no, and I would argue that
Ignorance
it's
is
not.
an excuse, right? Without any moral justification to support it, what's going to keep people from breaking the rules? Just penalties?
These are repercussions.
Repercussions?
And in a lot of ways, sometimes it's social. Like if you're playing a board game with a group of people and you continuously cheat, if all these people agree that these are rules we follow for it, even if it deviates from the rule book, it's a set of rules social. When you break it, you're removed from the game eventually because that's sort of your punishment.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because a lot of this stuff can apply to tabletop games, or especially like cooperative games and group role-playing situations, but it can also apply to any game you're sitting down to. If you're sitting down with somebody who consistently cheats, and you're playing a tabletop role-playing game, and they somehow manage to roll natural 20s all the time.
Yeah, but they won't let you look at it. Nope.
Oh, look, I've already
natural
moved the
20.
dice. You can't see it now. Sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't know you wanted to see it.
That impacts our sense of fairness, right? And there are 5 categories of ethical categories in communications. That's my background: honesty, integrity, respect, responsibility, and fairness. So when we communicate, fairness is one of those, and that sense of we're all on equal footing, we're all being treated the same. And of course, that takes us back to that Judeo-Christian ideology, right? But that's our sense. What's one of our senses of right and wrong? Are we being treated fairly?
Yeah, I mean, because if you keep with just a purely relative mindset, what's wrong with Mr. Bungle? He was just, like somebody said, playing a different game, and that was the game that worked for him.
But he was playing with other people, and
But I
that's
think-
what made it wrong.
Yeah,
That was not a justification, right?
no.
One thing that also made it wrong was that he took autonomy away from the other players.
Yeah.
They're all characters.
But that's where we think it's important as a community to be able to sit down and define at least some right and wrong. Like ethics are still
Player
important.
autonomy being
Yeah,
an
player
important
autonomy
thing
is
we hold
big.
as a community, right?
And you can feel what takes his own medicine. That's in control.
Yeah, vigilante style.
Then again, you're doing what you said was wrong.
Well, he was a clown.
Also doesn't like that.
That was his avatar, was a clown. Right? You have a question?
I guess one thing I'm curious about, so we're talking about games here. In rules, in real life, rules aren't necessarily guaranteed to be ethical, but in a game, the game decides these are the rules of the game.
They do.
So like, which one are we talking about?
Oh, wrong way. Yeah, well, I think we're going to keep it focused here on the game, primarily, and on game rules. But the idea is that within the play community, games are a social contract in terms of playing with others, right? And so rules, of course, and we should always distinguish this. What makes something legal or illegal doesn't necessarily make it right or wrong. We can leave the government there. They can decide that sort of thing. And they tend to pick it based on constructive and destructive, what harms, what helps. And we can use some of that same principle here in gameplay as well. Is this harmful to the community? Is this helpful to the community? Is another good principle that we can use.
And I mean, depending on the situation, you can find people that will argue a lot of situations both ways. Like, especially, say, any digital game, you can find cheating software for it, and then no matter how good your anti-cheating software is, somebody will find a way around it.
Yeah. So how do we stop players from cheating? And why do so many players cheat? You know?
The only way to stop players.
Go ahead. No, you're doing
The
fine.
only way to stop players from cheating is to make them not want to cheat. Right?
There's, there are either penalties in place for the cheating, or there's benefits for not cheating, right?
That is, for every restriction or every penalty you put for cheating, there's always going to be someone who's going to object to that, because now it's taking away their fun. And we're kind of having a back and forth argument saying, hey, they can't ban this. There was nothing wrong.
There was nothing wrong with.
Nothing wrong with doing this. And then we're just going to have back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and people are going to try to take the penalty down. And if it takes it down, then people are complaining that they're just being whiners or babies. Negative reinforcement chest, basically.
But you can also have like the positive thing of like, oh, you get a higher status symbol for like, I completed this thing, didn't have to use key code. Oh.
It works.
Yeah.
Possibly work.
So here are a couple of questions that we have. We're not going to answer them here with you, but something to think about. How is following rules an ethical choice? If there's a moral reason to follow the rules, if I feel this is wrong, that's another motivation, right? Not to break the rules. Whose job is it to enforce the rules? Well, we can't put it all on the game developers.
Again, they can try to create anti-cheating software. They can try and put all kinds of stuff together. Somebody's going to come up with a way around it.
Right. As a community, what can we do then?
I mean, it's that statistic where over 1/3 of gamers were subscribing to this one cheating software company. That's our community. On some level, like, do we have any responsibility to try and speak up against it or do anything?
Mm-hmm. So if your friend's using an aimbot, tell them that's wrong. Right? Or maybe if you're doing it, something to consider. Because there are times where it's okay to bend the rules, right? In role-playing games, I could kill the entire party, or I could fudge the dice a little bit and you survive for another day. You know, there are times, or if you're playing with a young player who doesn't really know the rules very well, okay, you can go back and redo your turn. It's fine. Help you learn it. So those are some things to think about when it comes to rules. Here's our second ethical situation, fair play. So one of the more controversial items that you can buy in MMOs, level skips. That automatically pump your character up X levels so you could skip ahead in the game to get to the end game content. Some argue that this basically means that you can buy your way through the game. It's pay to play.
I mean, the positive arguments for it that I've heard are you're just starting a new game and all your friends have been playing it, so they're all playing this other content and you'd like to play with them. Mm-hmm. And so that's why that's at least listed as available. So you can go play with your friends.
Oh, and this lets me skip all that grinding that you have to do to get through levels 1 through 80.
But then, you know, those of us players who played through all the content to get to where we were kind of maybe feel a little cheated.
Yeah. Or you have a level 80 player or character, but a level 1 player.
Yeah, they have all the levels and the gear and stuff, but they don't know the mechanics for a level 80 game or whatever the max level end game content is for the game you're playing. I play Final Fantasy. It's actually now level 90. I'm not there yet.
So what's the problem with this? Why do people kind of get a little bit upset about this? And this kind of falls into the notion of fair play. Fair play basically means treating all the players the same. No one receives favoritism. The same rules apply to everybody. All right? And so you know, game developers can skirt this by giving nice equipment if you're willing to pay the extra $10 on their game shop, right? Is that fair? It's part of the game. I got to see a hand in the back there. What do you think?
I think part of it is people aren't framing the question right. If you say 1 hour of my time is $10, to go and level up one place in the store is $10, you have equality. Your hour versus just paying the money outright. The longer that goes on, if you now spend $100 to level up once versus 100 hours, well, suddenly you're going to say, actually, I should probably spend the money. So I say it's partly that. People need to frame it better than what they're actually discussing.
What about games like Clash of Clans, where if I'm not paying for it, I'm going to get creamed very fast?
And ultimately, that's the thing. Just like in real life, you have race cars. It took NASCAR to only very recently before they just simply said, forget it, everybody's using the cars we're providing, and everything is exactly the same. Before that, if you had the money to buy the high-rate engines and put in the best people, you would win NASCAR very consistently. Your money mattered.
Now, those are good arguments.
You went in aware of that. You knew that money mattered, just like in real life.
I don't know, but let me ask this question. Does this kind of hurt the play for the rest of the players? Are these things good things to have in a game for play and fun? Yeah, what do you think?
Basically, a way of saying, if I can't afford it, then why should they have it? Why should they have it in my game, basically?
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that you may enjoy playing a game, but say you don't have the best job. You make enough to pay for, you know, your rent, your food, you know, your basic necessities, but you don't have a lot to pour into this game, and you may not have a lot of time either. Is this taking away your fun by seeing other people who can, or feeling like you feel bad then because you can't put as much into that?
I don't know how to argue, or I actually don't know how to reason about this topic, because just like gambling, it's not a game that I can imagine myself enjoying.
All right, let's take it from the player's perspective. What about smurfing? You guys familiar with this term? This came from WoW. And basically, it's a high-level, very skilled player who creates a new character so that they can play low-level people and cream them. All right? So it's the idea of, like, let's say in Overwatch, what's one of the higher rankings? Grandmaster, right? Yeah. You create a new account at gold level, and you're a Grandmaster.
And that could also lead to force fear for everyone else who has earned money that is doing things at that level. And then it becomes more community from how you're affecting everyone else's play.
Yeah, what about this group, at least we'll talk MMOs and other type of games where you're in game content, these big dungeons, these big group activities. What if a couple of your players, or a good number of them, either bought their way up or haven't taken the time to learn the mechanics of the fights and the battle? They're going to slow your group down. Or in some, you'll just party wipe repeatedly.
I have something to add with that. So I'm a frequent Destiny 2 player, and a lot of the time, people aren't at what's called the power level, which is it's like your tutor. A lot of the time in that community, people will go out of their way to help people who are at lower power. Like recently, there's an event called Dare to Eternity, which you immediately load into upon starting the game, including new players. And they don't know what they're doing. They're wondering why this celestial force and this guy with a tentacle for a face is talking. So people have begun what's called rescue missions, where they equip stuff with really low levels to queue with people who have just started the game.
Well, that's kind of nice. They're trying to help their new players. You know, that's a great segue into our next section. I want to jump into it.
Go right ahead.
All right, here's just a few questions. Why does fairness matter? Is something unfair if it's part of the game? In competitive games, how can we encourage fair play? And what's unfair about pay-to-play wins? But let's talk about this one, playing nice. You know, didn't your parents tell you as a kid, now go play nice? And you turn to them and go, what does that mean?
Or is that just my generation and we're really old?
Are we really old? Did you guys parents do that too? Play nice? Yeah, okay, good. Linda Hughes wrote a study a number of years ago about children playing Foursquare. Have you ever played Foursquare? Yeah, it's a little game out in the playground where you have four squares and everybody's trying to throw the balls around. What she observed was that the children there had a rule that they called Rui's rules. And Rui's rules weren't about the game itself, but how you played the game and how you behaved. It was playing nice, doing things that made people feel welcome, treating each other with dignity, showing concern for their well-being. If somebody fell down, help them up. If it was a smaller kid, not slamming the ball in their face, even if you had the strength to do so. That's not in the rules, per se. Or ganging up on a child, like continuing to hit one child over and over and over and over again. Those were all Rui's rules, and they were about playing nice. In athletics, they call this sportsmanship. Okay, news. Ultima Online was one of the first MMOs to come out in the late 1990s, but it kind of had a problem. Everyone started in the same town, okay? And it was not PvP in the town, but the moment you stepped out of the town, it was PvP. You see where I'm going right now. So after a little while of play, the older players who'd gotten all the endgame content started camping around this town. And anybody who knew came in, they got slaughtered real quick. And that was their fun. That was their game.
Yeah, because you got the dead player stuff. It was left there for the whatever player killed you to loot, and then you had to start over in the town. Not
that it mattered at that point, because it was like chairs. It was Ultima Online. But still, players weren't playing nice. There was nothing in the rules that said they couldn't do that, but they weren't playing nice. All right?
Yeah, spawn camping.
Spawn camping. Swatting. Oh, you're familiar with this one. This is where we call, yeah, I'm escalating this. This is when we see a Twitch streamer playing a game and we call the police on them so that we can watch the SWAT team break into their house while they're trying to, I don't know, play Fortnite or something. Right? Or what about being a sore loser or a sore winner? In 2018, at an Overwatch tournament in Philadelphia, Lee Carpe Jayuk, I'm going to butcher his name, I apologize, Shay. Okay, Carpe, I'm just going to say Carpe, defeated his opponent, Chon Ado Gian, and then proceeded to teabag him. This caused a bit of a discussion, because teabagging is something that's part of the general play, but is that good sportsmanship in competitive play?
Literally known as the after bad manners.
This resulted in some boos from the crowd and calls for Carpe to give up his MVP title. Now, it's not illegal, it's not against the rules. All right? So what does it mean to play nice? I'm going to let you answer this one.
You want me to answer the questions? I thought we weren't answering any questions.
Oh, that's right. We're not answering these questions. We're just bringing them up for you.
No, but I mean, I think it's worth considering. It's like, how does your game treat new players? How does your game make it? Okay, so it's good if you have end-game content and you've got all these mechanics and you want the people in your group to know how to play it. But what's the curve for teaching people the content? Like, if you've got someone who just got to that point, how are they supposed to learn it? Like, are you going to immediately kick them out of their party because their stuff's not optimal?
How many of you have left a game because of the people there? Okay. How many of you have stuck around a game, even though it was a mediocre game, because of the people there? Oh, they make a difference. Your other players make a difference, even in bad games. If you've got good players with you, and they're engaging, they're fun, they're good, they make it a good experience for you and for them, then it makes all
And again,
the
we're
difference.
talking a lot about the digital games because I think that is something we need to continue. We don't have a lot of social rules for yet because it's still fairly new. I mean, in a historical context, the late 90s is still really new.
Historically, I know.
But, you talk tabletop play. Yesterday?
Mm-hmm.
No, Friday. Friday we did the Parenting the Toxic Players panel. Because what about role-playing games where you have people playing toxic? that can make people leave your group, or you're going to want them to leave your group because it's not fun to play with these people.
Yeah. I mean, why do we play games? I mean, why do we play them?
And what about when you're playing with good friends and you know trash talk and teabagging might just be funny to them because you know them?
You know them, and it won't ruin their play, but if you're playing with a stranger, you've been randomly assigned on Overwatch.
I was playing cards with my mom and husband, and I noticed that every time the game was over, they would trash talk each other.
You were mentioning that too.
Okay.
Your relatives are all Italian.
Yeah, I come from a very large Italian family, and yes, so banter was part of it.
Yeah, and see, my family's Irish, so we hold grudges. I mean, Monopoly can cause divorces in my family, so there are certain games we don't play.
It was good multi-generational fun in my family. Like, I had games where we had upwards of 4 generations playing in the same Monopoly game, which was fun.
Yeah, no, we couldn't do that in mine. I have an uncle I haven't seen in 30 years because he's mad that my parents lost a baseball card.
How much was it worth?
Probably a lot, but still. Would you leave your family over a baseball card? Some of you are nodding, going, "I'd leave them for free. Come on." You know. But playing nice is an ethical question. What does playing nice matter? What's wrong with it being a bad winner or a sore loser? So we got bad winners. What about sore losers? Ooh. Yeah, not fun. Okay. Let's see,
Yeah, they gave us the 10-minute, I think, a minute ago.
We did. So I'm going to move on to our last one here. So what's the game developer's role? So this one's kind of an interesting one.
Yeah, we're going to move into the tabletop world now.
Just a moment.
We've been playing a lot of tabletop role-playing, and we've played Dungeons & Dragons, both of us, since 2nd edition, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, in the early 90s. I said we were old.
Well, we've been playing a while.
But something we've noticed is that alignment's become less of a thing.
Are you guys familiar with the D&D alignment chart table? It's basically a chart where you.
I mean, even if you haven't played it, it's pretty well memed on the internet too.
Yeah.
I think.
And you'll be lawful good or chaotic evil, and it's basically your moral leanings for your character, right? So there's lots of these fun charts on there.
Which we're not going to go into. There was a great panel on that a couple days ago, I think.
Yeah.
That's not the point of this.
Well, something we noticed looking at the different editions is that we saw a lot of people, especially in the community, saying that alignment is problematic. They don't like it. They don't want it as a mechanic. They don't care for it. And gradually over time, it became less so. So
yeah. So for instance, in 2nd edition, to play a paladin, you had to play the lawful good alignment. And if you wanted to change alignment, there was an EXP or level penalty. So it was really discouraged. They wanted you to play alignment.
By 5th edition, we've noticed that it is essentially meaningless. It's in the book, but protection from good, like the spell, doesn't protect you from good. It protects you from certain races.
Like the devils or demons or whatnot.
Instead of being ethical, you're now racist.
But I mean, it's D&D. Most people agree that otherworldly fiends are supposed to be bad, but they no longer protect from like evil NPCs or other players or anything like that. Like, you can't use it in game that way anymore.
And so this made us ask some questions. They're like, okay, so why was alignment so contentious? Why did people, and a lot of it, when we looked at the debates, it was because people wanted to argue that your lawful good was different from my lawful good, right? And so here we can see some of those postmodernistic, relativistic influences, right? It's just your opinion.
Yeah. Your culture's good is not necessarily the goblin culture's good. So what if the goblin thinks it's being good, but we've labeled it as evil?
Those are good questions.
Why did the DM say I can't use necromancy for good?
That's right. What's wrong with summoning the dead and ripping their souls back into the land of the living and enslaving them for my own good?
You're bringing people's loved ones back.
We're bringing people's loved ones back. So who cares if some of them are missing parts? Right? But that isn't to say that, you know, you can't role play, do whatever you want to play. I mean, I played Vampire, which I don't think you can play good in Vampire. The World of Darkness, it's all about that. So, I mean, it's not to say you can't play, but it's interesting that we've been moving so much to wanting to just kind of dismiss it or get rid of it. And so instead of asking these good questions, you know, you're good, lawful good is my good, lawful good, the game players, or a lot of the game companies are like, well, we don't even want to get into this discussion anymore. Let's just quietly remove it. 6th edition probably won't even have it in there anymore. Although they may keep it just because they know we love making these silly little charts. You know?
To be fair, that might be accurate.
I think that is.
But again, it's like alignment of your character does not reflect you as a person.
Yeah.
Like, it was just meant to be a way to define your world. That was it. Like, why is it such a problem?
All right. And so what are some trends in morality? And so here we're going to do some predictions. Where do we see it going? And I'm going to make a couple of predictions here. I think that we're going to continue to go, this is my opinion, all right? We're skipping on that. My opinion, I think we're moving into areas of subjectivity. I think that we're going to see that taking more and more of a hold. We want to make it subjective and more relativistic. I think that's reflected in some of those studies that we talked about earlier. We don't want to think about it. We want to pass the rules of ethics and enforcing ethics to game developers and designers, which is unrealistic. They just can't do it, right? I don't know what Blizzard Activision can do about their toxic community. Or is it a toxic community? I don't know. I actually don't play a game, so I'm not sure. I just read a lot about these things. And I think that we're going to be moving more in that direction. However, I think that we're also going to be seeing a little bit of a rise of legalism. We're going to be depending on the rules more to determine whether something's right or wrong, but without good ethical justification behind it. And and we talked about the problem with that, because if there's no ethics to not do something, you're just breaking the rule. It's not really that big of a deal. And so...
And sometimes rules are wrong and need to be changed. Mm-hmm. But if you can't provide a reason for it, then the rules has to stay because there's nothing else necessarily.
However, I want to end on a more positive note. We have a power of community. So what kind of gaming community do you want? What kind of gaming community do you want to live in? Can we agree to follow at least the golden rule, right? Or in general, what kind of community are we creating? How welcoming are we to new players? I'll admit I've been terrified to pick up a MOBA because I would start off not playing very well. And from what I've seen, they're not very good at guiding people into it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of with that too. I wanted to play League of Legends. I looked at the characters, and that's something that
awesome.
Yeah, that's what draws me in. I'm like, I'm also a cosplayer, so I'm like, that looks like it'd be fun to cosplay, and I want to play that game. But then I heard that the community was kind of harsh on people who were new or didn't know how to play the game optimally, and so I just didn't pick it up because I'm too old for that kind of headache.
Really?
See, that's what I've heard.
And that's what I've heard too.
Even though it didn't look like a bad game, and the character design I thought looked really cool.
Yeah,
so
I was absolutely crashing on this one guy when he told me to slip my wrist. That was fun. He never got that.
Yeah, but
I say I don't turn on the all chat just because I don't care to be doing what the other people say.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Like when I went to different games, I don't really know the difference. I just know that what measures are allowing me to contact you. And in most cases, when you're allowed to freely talk or open chat, and there's a bill of anonymity with less protections, people will try to say freely practice will never say to someone in the face.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think hiding behind that it's a game or behind an avatar, that anonymity really can lead to some acting out behavior, like you're saying.
Yeah, people would act differently than they would in like face-to-face situations. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, like, right, and like I mentioned, like there's like Reason and Enlightenment Terra is that our products like the same toxicity could happen from someone on their screen, but the methods of communicating it is very limited to how it can happen.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one thing to say, well, disciplines. They're like their own people. I was using the game to with as cultural police.
Mm-hmm.
So when it is like you said, like like being on someone and then like them you can get the French to say something blatantly awful, but then get on repercussions because it's not being identified as teaching for that. Also part
Yeah.
of the like other countries, those Western other countries have like certain identities tied to their ID, like their actual social security number or certain education number that you do punish.
Okay.
They can't just go back to the
Well, that actually reminds me of a topic. That's why we've kind of focused on Western stuff now. I know a lot of Asian countries like Korea actually do have legal stuff tied to this. Like they've upped the game as far as where harming people's avatars, harming people's gameplay there.
If a
Especially with
couple,
competitive
if one
play.
of them deletes the other person's like WoW account as part of their divorce is revenge, it's considered like revenge porn. They're actually legally punished for it. You know? It's pretty crazy. I don't know, do we need those kind of rules?
I don't think that argument that people won't do things in real life, but they'll do it in a virtual space, I don't think that argument holds as true as people want to believe it holds.
I actually agree with that.
Depends on the person how much they feel their social pressures are willing to exert or willing to care about it. Because some people just probably don't care. And other people, like in one tournament, and with my friend gave me, we were all aligned on a chair, and he was blaming his other teammate on the team, and just constantly blaming him, and he just stood up, walked over to him, like, dude, I'm right here. And the guy was, the other guy was like, almost scared, like, John, please, no, your teammate is literally visible right there. You're blaming him on the computer. You're basically presenting the same type of, they're actually thinking if he was like on the other side of the country, he is right there. And immediately, they took me, a bronze player, and subbed out a platinum player that was that toxic because they did not want to deal with this BS. And they were willing to go with me, like, hold my hands through it.
As a community, we have a lot of power to do what you were just saying there,
I mean,
discouraging that negative
Yeah,
behavior.
we're supposed to be wrapping up, so I
we
guess
got to wrap up, sorry.
Yeah, the point of this panel really was to kind of get our community thinking, because I think community and games, as we get more MMO group games, MOBAs, even tabletop role playing, coming to conventions here and picking up a random group in like the Dungeons and Dragons Adventures League or the Pathfinder group, as a community, should we be setting some kind of like at least social rules or whatnot, and how you interact with people, what's okay, what's going to be too far for the trash talk type stuff? I mean, some is to be, I think, expected.
And of course, we don't
And
need
it's
to have, like,
in good fun.
laws and them on the board.
But is there something that would be considered too far? Like what's too much? Or are there lines that you could only cross with maybe your close group of friends, but you shouldn't do when you're playing with people you don't know? Like we have those social rules in real life for, you know, etiquette and interactions, but
We need to teach
netiquette is kind of netiquette is a bit of a newer thing.
Yeah.
And netiquette, like when I went back to nursing school a few years ago, and they had netiquette as part of the class thing, like how to send emails and how to be polite to your professors on email, or if you have group forums to post on, here's how you post politely. And that's just in a college setting. Netiquette in these game contexts is, I think, a very new thing, especially like in Western countries where we don't have as much competitive play or serious competitive.
We're getting there.
I think we're getting there. So it's worth talking about. It's worth considering or chewing on and thinking about.
So before we wrap up, I want to leave you a challenge. Ethics begins at the individual level. So think about how you're treating others in your play. And when you engage in some of these things that we talked about, following the rules, playing nice, fair play, demonstrate some of those ethical values in your play, you'll find that you'll have a lot more fun, and you'll find that they'll want to play with you more, you know? And so that's my challenge to you, is let's be ethical in our play with one another, you know?
Ethics matter.
Ethics matter. We should
especially in building good games, good community.
Mm-hmm.
Like everyone raised their hand. They've left games for bad community. Bad community can ruin a really good game.
Yeah. Or it can keep a mediocre one alive for a while. What are some, before you guys leave, I just want to hear, what is some good gaming communities you've been in? What's some great gaming community? Yeah.
Destiny 1 and Destiny 2.
Destiny 1, Destiny 2 had a good one for you? Right.
Guild Wars 2.
Guild Wars 2. Oh, I love Guild Wars. We've been playing Final Fantasy 14.
But
We actually find that many of them are pretty good.
yeah,
Some TF2 servers.
TF2?
some of them.
Some of them. Caveat.
First 3 WoW expansions.
Oh.
Before they took out a lot of the, put in a lot of ease of use tools, which took out the community's ability to manage itself.
Yeah, ooh, interesting. That would be an interesting discussion on it.
That's funny, since from what I've heard, they're blaming their players for being toxic, and if they've taken out that way to police themselves.
Like,
If I'm understanding that. I played WoW, but it was in those earlier expansions. It's been a while.
It was fun. I enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it for when I played it, but definitely haven't played anything
Yeah,
newer
we stopped at the pandas.
before the
old
pandas.
school Dungeon Finder, when you had to just like post and chat, it was so much easier to get rid of a toxic player because you just like, you could find someone else, you could bring in a friend, you could just find someone new. With the group finder, you lose a lot of that agency. You don't, well, WoW's kind of a bad example, but like, let's say League of Legends where the games go for 45 minutes. You're matched with these people, and you have no control over who you're matched with. And you can't kick someone out for being toxic without it being a detriment to your team. And it's not like playing like a pickup basketball game where you can just sub someone in. And I think the tools of how we match players together.
The mechanisms can support or discourage it too, I think is what you're aiming for.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
the mechanisms for how we get people together are really undercutting the community's ability to moderate.
So, as a community, we have some power, but the game developers, they're not out of it loop yet.
I mean, ideally, they will create content that will make it so that players can have that choice or ability, like at least be able to remove a player if they're being bad.
So our final question is, where have all the heroes gone? Well, let's be those heroes, right? Let's be those heroes in those games. Thank you for coming to our panel. Hope you had a great MAGFest. Have a good week, everybody, and a great new year. Thank you.
Yep.